So I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Staff can call the roll, please.
Council President Furman,
Present.
Alder Carter,
Present.
Alder Verveer,
Here.
Alder Figueroa Cole,
Here.
Alder Vitiver,
Present.
Alder Evers.
Here.
Chair, you have quorum.
Great. Thanks so much. I know we have registered people registered for comment. So if we can get the tech intro, that'd be great.
Welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members of the committee, if you're able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you're able, please activate your video while you're speaking. In this meeting, panelists have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Please use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Staff, please use the raise hand feature when you're asked a question. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. Staff will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the committee, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. President Furman, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. We do not have anybody registered for just general public comment. So we'll move on to disclosures and recusals. Does anybody have any disclosures or recusals to make? Okay, not seeing any. We will move on to picking items for the consent agenda. I want to let everybody know that we do have registrants for item number 1920 for people willing, able to answer questions but not registered to speak. So that's on 19 and 20, but we do have some individuals registered on 22. So we'll pull that off the consent agenda. We also have people registered to answer questions on 24 and 34. I think it looks like we will probably want to pull item number 33 and 34 from the consent agenda. So that right now I've got 22, 33, 34. We also have a presentation on item number 32. So I assume we will pull that as well. And we just got an email with late changes to, I believe it was item 18. I don't know if anybody wants that pulled, but Alder Verveer, I will turn the floor over to you and you can tell me what you'd like to see pulled.
Thank you, President Furman. I thought it would be appropriate for us to hear briefly from the city attorney as to what the modifications are in agenda item number 18, resolution, the late substitute.
Perfect. Okay, so we've got 18, 22, 32, 33, and 34 being pulled from the consent agenda. Are there any other items people wish to see removed from the consent agenda? Okay, not seeing any. Would somebody like to make a motion? Alder Vitiver, go ahead.
Move to approve the consent agenda as stated by President Furman.
Can I get a second? Great, thank you. Unless there's an objection, I'm going to assume approval by unanimous consent. And move on to item number 18. All right, perfect. Attorney Haas, I assume you are with us. Great. Yes. Attorney Haas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President Furman, and good afternoon, everybody. And I want to again apologize for the email I just sent out probably 10 minutes ago. So this agenda item is to consider the structural agreement and the annual agreement for Overture, or at least the resolution to approve both of those. There was a resolution entered into Legistar a couple of weeks ago for introduction, and the substitute really only changes two things. In let me find here the paragraphs. The paragraph 6 of the resolution, we inserted figures for the capital reserve numbers that the Overture Center Foundation is required to provide to the city. They just finished their annual audit. and provided those figures to us last week. So those are inserted into paragraph 6. And then paragraph 10 is a more substantive change, which is new this year. There was some input from the Arts Commission and our negotiating team and the Community Advisory Council, which advises Overture, that the city wanted to have access to more information related to Overture's efforts to support and promote diversity and equity in 3 areas. It's population of performers, in its promotional outlets, and in its audiences. Overture has already been creating a database to capture some of this data, a dashboard to capture some of this data, and said it could certainly share that. And this provision would require them to provide that information, including the data and Overture's efforts to promote diversity and equity on an annual basis. The other somewhat significant change is that we have a 10-year structural agreement. If you may recall, the last 2 years, we extended that agreement just by 1 year for a couple of reasons. Because of the effects of COVID on the operations of Overture, and because it was in transition in its leadership team, and initially trying to appoint a new CEO, and now they have formed a leadership team. And so the last couple of years, we just did 1-year agreements. This year, we wanted to get a new 10-year agreement in place. So that is a structural agreement. And then on an annual basis, we have an annual agreement which does a couple of things. It specifies what the city's grant amount is that is approved by the Room Tax Commission. And it also has a number of reporting requirements that are renewed from year to year. There were also some reporting requirements in the structural agreement, and I think everybody thought it would be a good idea to put all of those in one place. So we moved some provisions of the reporting agreement, of the structural agreement related to Overture's reporting requirements into the annual agreement. And those can be revisited on an annual basis. And the benefit of that is that there is has been some discussion about trying to simplify or update those reporting requirements. And we did not quite have enough time to do a deep dive into those. And so I think both sides are interested in and willing to continue to explore those, see if there can be anything done to make those reporting requirements more efficient over the next year. And then they could be any changes could be incorporated into next year's annual agreement. So I think that probably captures kind of the changes from the previous agreements. And we certainly had representatives of finance and the mayor's office and the community development staff on our negotiating team. And so this is where we have ended up with. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Attorney Haas. Before we go to questions for Attorney Haas or any other staff, can I get a motion?
I move adoption of the substitute resolution.
Second.
Thank you. Are there questions for Attorney Haas or any other staff members that might be with us today? Alder Figueroa, roll call.
Thank you, President Furman. Haas, so for the performance report thing, is that something that you said that they already collected some data? Will that data be shared sometime soon?
Well, so this agreement, well, first of all, I assume are you referring to the DEI data?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that has not been part of a previous agreement. We brought it up with Overture. They were open to that. they said they're in the process of creating that dashboard now. So I don't think they have collected that data so far. They're on a different fiscal year. And so this would be the first year that they would be required to submit that data within 90 days of the end of their fiscal year, which is mid-year is the end of their fiscal year next year. So we would expect to get information for the council to and the Arts Commission to have access to prior to considering next year's annual agreement.
And then I read a paragraph that talks about what the data collection is, but is there any other area that focuses also on hiring practices? It seemed like this was more of the services that they provide.
Right. This provision is focused. It does not focus on hiring. It focuses on performers, promotional outlets, where they advertise, and audience demographics to the extent that they can collect that.
Okay, but there's no agreement in regards to hiring practices. So,
No, we did not insert any language.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Alder. Any other questions? Okay, is there any discussion on this item? Not seeing any, I will assume approval by unanimous consent, and we will move on to item 22, which we have multiple registered speakers for. So find where I put that, sorry. Our first speaker registered to speak on that is Baltazar de Andela Santana.
There is no one present by that name.
Okay, move on to the next person, which is Stephanie Morano.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you for having me. My name is Stephanie Moreno, and I'm with WRTP Big Step. So I am the South Central lead coordinator for this office. Our main office is in Milwaukee. I just wanted to, show some gratitude for the Community Services Committee for actually approving what we had requested. So we not only did we approved a certain amount, we didn't get it. However, we did get something, and that for us is huge. I wanted to, let you know that we are currently actively working with partners in the realms of youth, young adults, and pre-employment. And these partners are, OFS, Latino Academy, Boys and Girls Club. And we recently just also partnered up with the Urban League so that we're able to provide in the area of construction, some pre-employment and some training so that folks within the city of Madison are able to get prepared for work, for some jobs in the area of Madison, the city of Madison. It is really, it makes me happy because after the pandemic, or actually during the pandemic, it forced us to reevaluate our training programs. And we feel that with these partnerships that we've created, we're able to provide better training for the, city of Madison residents. We also, continue, and we've always had a partnership with Madison College, and it's through them who we're able to, provide this type of training, as well as other partnerships that I had previously stated. I just wanted to, let you know that at least in the past year, we've provided about 142 people that have come through our doors, looking, seeking for some kind of services that we have provided, whether that would be tutoring, that would be training with what our program called entry-level construction skills program, or where we provide an MC3 curriculum. And this is a national curriculum that is by the North American Building Trades Unions. Through them, of these 142, we have we have had about 45 people, women and people of color, actually placed within some sort of job, whether it's in construction and or manufacturing. I think that this is a pretty big deal, considering the fact that I think we're just now gaining not notoriety, but that people are getting to know who we are here in the Madison area. And then within that,
Stephanie,
Yes.
that's time.
oh,
Thank
sorry.
you.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Our next speaker is Scott T. Hines.
Can you hear me?
We can, Scott, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of Big Step. My name is Scott Hintz. I am the coordinator for the Madison Area Sheet Metal Training Center. And I just want to say what they've done for us as far as diversifying our applicants list is unreal. When I first became coordinator, our applicant list was around 6 or 7 people. And working with Big Step, we're well over into the 30s now. And how diversified they're able to get into areas and help us recruit much better than we are, because people like to learn from people like them. And they've just been an amazing partner with us. And I just cannot say enough of what they've done as far as getting the talent that they've brought to the sheet metal trade here. Not only do they get everybody with the minimum qualifications all set for us, they exceed that. And I truly believe it's the training and the passion that they actually have to get that to that point.
Great. Thank you, Scott. And our final speaker signed up is Gregory Markley.
There is no one by that name present.
Okay, and I assume Baltazar has not joined us.
Correct.
Okay, are there any questions for the registrants that have spoken or the registrants that have signed up that are willing to answer questions on this? That everybody on the committee should have received an email with details on all the other registrants. Okay, not seeing any questions. We'll go ahead. I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Discussion? Unless I see otherwise, I will assume approval by unanimous consent. All right, moving right along. We'll move on to agenda item 32, which has to do with year-end appropriation resolution. And I believe finance staff has a presentation for us.
We do. I will walk through that. Thank you, Chair. Let me share my screen. Let's see, which I have too many screens open. Hang on one second. Can you all see that? Great. So before you in this agenda item is a resolution that you see every year. It's what we call the year-end appropriation resolution. And it really is a reflection of projections in terms of budget need, and both between agency appropriations and in this instance, an increase as well to an agency's budget from fund balance. And mostly that's to reflect expenditure restraint maximums. So I will go through this. So we'll cover the year-end projection and then walk through what is in the resolution before you this evening. So first of all, you've seen this format before. This is a projection comparing the adopted budget, both for general fund revenues and property taxes, as well as what we call agency revenues, which then offset expenditures to get a net appropriation amount. And that's what we control at in terms of appropriation levels. So you'll see the adopted budget in that second column. There have been some revisions to that were made in the mid-year appropriation and I think one other resolution, and then the year-end projection. And you'll see that revenue are expected to actually do better. This negative is in accounting terms. So it's actually, a positive from the revenue perspective. We have basically 10 million more in collections or other measures on the revenue side than what was originally budgeted. And then on the expenditure side, we're estimating about 7.2 million in expenditures less, with about $600,000 less in agency revenues. So the net of that is projected expenditures will be about 6.6 million under the budgeted amount. So we are then projecting a surplus prior to what we call an adjustment for mark-to-market calculation that's made on city investments that's required under governmental accounting standards. Anyways, we have a surplus of a little under $17 million. However, with this mark-to-market adjustment, which is significant, and I'll get into that in a little more detail on the next few slides, we will have a slight deficit of about $3.2 million that will, in effect, reduce the general fund balance by that amount at the end as of December 31st of 2022. That's the projection at this time. So just to run through the highlights, revenues are up about 10.6 million. This does include a HRSA payment. That's a payment under the American Rescue Plan Act to the city that was made to all of the entities that provide ambulance services. And again, since the city has EMS service, we receive that to basically help offset costs that were incurred or lost revenues that were incurred related to ambulance services. So that has been deposited in the general fund and is a part of that $10.6 million surplus. Other parts of that surplus are primarily related to higher investment income. Again, our investments are basically doing better as interest rates have gone up relative to what we thought in the original budget. And then room tax is also projected to be above estimates, as is the building permits. On the expense side, we did not do a comprehensive projection for all the agencies, but we did focus on the largest agencies, police and fire, and we'll run through what the details are there on the next slide. I mentioned the mark-to-market adjustment, which we do every year, and it is required under governmental accounting standards. And basically what it is we calculate the market value of our investments as of the end of this year relative to the actual par value of the investments. And what we've seen and what all of us have experienced over the last few months is really a very rapid and large increase in interest rates as the Federal Reserve has taken action to try to drive down inflation. And that the scale and scope of that is really unprecedented over the last 40 plus years. So we have not seen really anything like that. And what that means is our long-term investments, we have to sort of show that from a accounting perspective. Basically, if we had invested that money today at the higher interest rates relative to what the investments are actually invested at. Now, once those investments reach maturity, they will reach that par value. And so we won't see this mark-to-market issue in future years, and we probably will have positive mark-to-market adjustments in the next couple of years. But that adjustment is $20 million. and much more significant than it's been in prior years, and really reflective of that rapid and sudden change in interest rates over the last several months. So turning to police and fire expenses, the fire department budget is expected to be over the adopted amount by about $2.6 million. We had highlighted this at the mid-year projection back, I think that was in August, September. And a lot of that is driven by overtime. And again, that's due to the rate of absences on a daily basis being higher than what was anticipated in the budget, as well as sick leave payouts for individuals, commission staff in the fire department who are retiring. So 2.6 million over budget in the fire department. Police department is actually projecting a surplus of about $1 million, with much of that in salary savings due to turnover and vacant positions. And as you can see on this slide, 35 commission retirements and resignations year to date. And so, and then a slight overage on overtime of about $60,000. So deficit in the fire department, surplus in the police department. Again, just to highlight a little bit further the issue with mark to market and where we're at with the general fund balance and where we're projected to be. This graph on the left just, I think, tries to highlight, this is tracks the market yield on U.S. Treasuries, the 10-year Treasuries over the last almost 30 years. And as you can see, what's happened since basically the end of 2020, mid 2020, as inflation began to pick up, is a really a very, very rapid and really unprecedented in terms of the slope of that increase, as well as how quickly it has occurred. And you can see that when you look back over the 10-year Treasuries over the last almost 30 years. And then the graph on the right just shows where we're at with fund balance. With that dark line is the share of the budget that is in our general fund balance. And our goal, as you know, is that green line, which is 15% of the budget. And we finished 2021 above that goal at about 16.5%. We expect that to fall to about the 15% target at the end of 2022, and project at the end of 2023 will be slightly below that target. The blue columns are just the amount of fund balance that's been applied in each budget since 1995. And you can see most recently $8 million was allocated to balance the 2021 budget. And then there is $3.4 million to balance the 2023 budget, as well as being used for a specific purpose in that budget, basically to pay, make a one-time payment, $1,000 payment to employees. So we're staying around that 15%, and that's where we have been over the last several years. But this just gives you a sort of a time series of what's happened with fund balance, basically over almost the last 30-year period. All right, so that's a quick look at the projections and the general fund balance. We'll turn now to what is in the year-end resolution. First, we'll be using $1.4 million of fund balance to help address that fire department deficit, as well as increasing spending to the maximum allowed under the expenditure restraint program. The resolution also makes transfers both within agencies and between agencies to address any projected shortfalls. It makes some technical corrections to the insurance and workers' compensation charges, as well as adjustments to the fleet service charges. And then makes some transfers in other funds within other agencies, including public health, the Community Development Authority, and the Debt Service Fund. And then make some adjustments in the 2022 capital budget to increase funding for the temporary men's shelter and to move some GO proceeds between projects so that we can comply with federal tax law requirements related to arbitrage. So on the general fund balance side, under the expenditure restraint program, the city has a limit in how much it can increase its spending each year and then qualify for a $7 million payment from the state. And so we have to monitor that each year. And then at the end of the year, what we try to do is increase appropriations up to the maximum amount allowed so that we then build the base upon which we calculate the subsequent year's maximum budget limit. And as you may recall, in the 2023 budget, there was a one-time reduction in the general fund subsidy to Metro. That has to be restored in the 2024 budget, and the repayment of that one-time reduction has to also begin in 2024. So trying to maximize that expenditure restraint budget limit is critical for the 2024 budget and beyond. On the fire department deficit side, we are the resolution closes that deficit through that $1.4 million new appropriation from the general fund balance, a transfer of $1.1 million from monies budgeted for compensated absence escrow amounts. There's some savings from the adjustments that I mentioned earlier to insurance and workers' compensation charges, and then also some adjustments in fleet, in the appropriation that was made to fleet in the mid-year appropriation. So all those combined together address the fire department's projected deficit. In terms of the transfers within agencies and between agencies, the transfers within agencies total about $3.7 million. Obviously that nets to zero, but that's the amount that's being moved around. And it also, in the community development division, includes accepting $32,000 in revenue from the school district related to purchase services and contracts there. And then it also makes $1.4 million in transfers from direct appropriations. Those are the centrally budgeted amounts to 6 agencies. And that's for compensated absence, escrow, and other deficits in salary and benefit costs in those agencies. So the budget included $3.25 million for sick leave escrow payments. We have a little over that amount in actuals through quarter 3. This resolution moves it from that centrally budgeted location to each of the agencies that are expecting these overages to address those shortfalls, including the fire department. As I mentioned earlier, on the billings and charges, first of all, for insurance and workers' compensation, when the 2022 budget was built, we used 2021 allocations. We need to update those so that it accurately reflects the amounts that each agency has and needs in terms of paying their charges. And that means that there was a slight adjustment in terms of how much needs to be paid from general fund appropriations in agencies versus how much is paid from other funding sources within agencies. And the netting of all that resulted in some general fund savings, a little under $140,000. As I mentioned earlier, that'll be one element of balancing the fire department's budget. And then on the fleet interdepartmental charges side, as you may recall, in the mid-year appropriation resolution, $1.4 million was transferred or appropriated, from the general fund balance to fleet because of cost overruns they were incurring, particularly for fuel and other sort of inflation and supply chain effects. We did not make the adjustments in agency budgets at that time, the budgets that are billed by fleet. And this makes, in the year-end appropriation, we make those adjustments and corrects the various billings and charges. And then also transfers some funding that nets out of that transaction also to help address the fire department's deficit. So the resolution before you also makes some adjustments in other funds, in the public health funds, transfers some money from supplies and purchase services to the salary line to address public health staffing strategy for the pandemic response, as well as funding associated with 2 COVID grants. And then in CDA and the debt service funds, there was GO debt authorized for CDA in the 2020 budget, and that money was borrowed on the assumption that CDA would proceed with the projects in that budget. Since that time, CDA received additional federal HUD funding, so they did not need the borrowing, but they had been billed for principal payments. And so this resolution would give that money back to CDA. The borrowing has then been transferred to support other projects. And then the temporary men's shelter, the resolution adds $100,000 in GO borrowing authority to help complete the project due to cost overruns relative to the current budget for that project. And then on the arbitrage side, in order to comply with federal tax law, we're doing a series of movements of money between capital projects so that we can take money borrowed more than 2 years ago and spend it quickly within certain projects. And in that way, we don't have these proceeds generating arbitrage, and we're in compliance then with federal tax law. So that is a quick summary of what is happening in the projections, where we think the general fund balance will be, and then what the year-end resolution is doing in terms of various transfers and addressing deficits in certain agencies.
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Are there any questions? Alder Vittever, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just struggling to understand the $3.2 million deficit, what that winds up actually, what the impact of that is. Can you help me understand that?
Sure. So we finished 2021 with an unallocated general fund balance of around $56 million. We're projecting that then at year end, that fund balance will be reduced by about $3.2 million. And then we'll go from roughly a 16.5% share of what that fund balance represents of our budget down closer, probably slightly below 15%. And 15% is our policy target.
Alder Verveer, go ahead.
Thank you, President Furman. And Dave, thank you so much for the very comprehensive overview of our annual year-end appropriation resolution. I do have one curiosity question in the text of the resolution. It obviously goes into greater detail than your presentation. And it mentions that the mayor's office specifically, you're projecting a deficit due to salary and benefits being over budget. Could you speak to that in a little more detail, what the cause of that was?
It's basically steps in longevity for a number of staff within the mayor's office. Just basically came in more than what was budgeted. Plus, do have some turnover, basically a salary savings assigned there, and that there wasn't as much turnover as what was anticipated. So those two factors together are why it's over budget.
Thank you. And you said it was more than one employee that had to step in longevity increases.
That's correct.
Thank you. And then I don't want to take a lot of time talking about the obvious big issue in the resolution, and that's the continuing fire department overtime deficit. We obviously covered that in some detail at the operating budget hearing with Chief Carbon. But I was wondering, Dave, and I know that Chief is here, so thank you, Chris, for being here as well. But between you folks, could you just confirm for us? And I know we talked about this again back in October in this forum, but that now that the 2023 operating budget has been adopted with the increase in overtime funding and so forth, what is our expectation moving into the new year in terms of the continuing issues with the fire department overtime budget deficit?
I'll start, and if Chief wants to add to that, but we did add significant funding to the fire department budget in the 2023 budget, precisely to address this issue, more overtime funding. And so with the goal of hopefully addressing the deficit, but a lot of that will be what the trends are in terms of the daily staffing and the vacancies associated with that. But I think that was those were the steps that were taken in the 2023 budget to try to address that. And the Chief might have a little more operational perspective on that.
Thank you, Dave. Chief, do you wish to share your thoughts on that overall question? As I say, I know we asked you a fair number of questions on this topic a few months ago. I don't know if you wish to provide us an update this afternoon. And
yeah, thank you, Alder. I appreciate it. And I apologize, I'm not in a position to turn my camera on right now. Otherwise, I absolutely would. I think as Dave mentioned, the budgeting was really done to reflect the current situation that we've been experiencing in the department for a couple of years now. We have certainly seen the absenteeism rate has gone up over the last couple of years, and those are things that we're working to investigate, see if we can identify some areas for improvement. As you know, every absence with our current staffing levels essentially equates to an overtime. At least in unexpected absenteeism, such as a sick call, would equal an overtime right now. We are anticipating, as we're going through the hiring process right now, we are anticipating a hiring class in about mid-year next year as the process comes to fruition, and are hopeful that the influx of those employees through that hiring process within next year can start to make an impact on the absenteeism and the impact, I should say, of the absenteeism on daily staffing levels. But it is something that's on our radar, of course, and we'll be working hard to see if we can identify additional measures to try and reduce those rates to the best of our capability.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chief. And thanks for joining us. You didn't have to be here this afternoon. Just one follow-up on the timing of the recruit class and so forth. Is it am I correct that it won't be until 2024 that we'll realize the full benefits of the increased staffing? And if so, can you speak to what quarter of 2024, or will you see some of the benefits in the new year as well?
Sure, I can certainly give you my best take on it. Presently, and I can start with with today's situation, we have a recruit class that'll be graduating at the start of December, which will give us an influx of 12 personnel. But then we're anticipating about that many people retiring just after the start of the year. So that should end up essentially a wash, if you will, in terms of a positive impact. This hiring process, we anticipate concluding with the first class of hires in July. And then after the conclusion of approximately a 13-week academy, that should get us July, August, about October when they hit the field and start making an impact there. That will obviously give us October, November, December of a positive impact. And then we'll go through this next year, doing our best to calculate the number of anticipated retirements at the end of 23 to determine, the net gain, if you will, for the start of 24, and then obviously plan for additional hires working through the budgetary process.
Thank you. Thanks for all the information and again for being here. Thank you, President.
Alder Verveer, while you still have the floor, would you mind making a motion?
Happy to do so. I move adoption of the resolution.
Second.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions for staff? Any discussion?
Just occurred to me, sorry to interject here, but as a technicality, it's technically a substitute because it was originally introduced by title only. So for the record, I'll move adoption of the substitute resolution.
I assume Alder Verveer, that is okay with your second? Fantastic. All right, seeing no discussion, I will assume approval by unanimous consent unless I see otherwise. All right, moving on to item number 33, which is discussion of our meeting format for 2023. This is kind of our last finance meeting of the year. I want to remind everybody we do have a brief finance meeting at 6 p.m. in person before our next council meeting for some bond related stuff. That's in room 108, I believe. So that will be in person, but we need to decide on the format. I would assume up until our end of April for finance meetings. I'm happy to entertain a motion. We can have discussion. Should it be virtual? Should we go back in person? The room is not ready for hybrid yet. I could tell you that much. And I assume next term's finance committee would figure out what to do in the future. Alder Carter, go ahead.
I move that we have virtual meetings.
Okay, can I get a second? Alder Figueroa Cole with the second. Any discussion? And that motion would be till the end of April. That would include one of the first meetings of the new term of the council, which makes sense. They'll be new, and then that particular committee can then discuss what they want to do going forward. Any discussion or questions? Not seeing any, so unless I see otherwise, I'll assume approval by unanimous consent, and that brings us to a closed session. Alder Verveer, do you want to read us into closed session?
Chair, I think we might be in open session first and then decide to go into closed session. There's a presentation and.
Okay, we can do that. So we'll take up item 34. We'll wait on a motion until we see the presentation and possibly go into closed session. And so sounds like staff has a presentation prepared. So let's go to that.
Thank you, President Furman. And I am just bringing up the memo right now, and we'll share screen. All right, is everyone seeing the memo on the screen regarding the development agreement for the State Street Campus Garage? All right, good evening, Finance Committee members. Before you on the screen is the memo that was included in the Legistar packet regarding the development agreement for the State Street Campus Garage. And I won't read the entire memo, but I'll briefly provide some of the highlights and then certainly open it up for discussion. And then as Dave Schmidtke noted, if the Finance Committee would desire, you could go into closed session to discuss some of these items further, or you could decide to remain in open session. I should also mention that I believe we're joined this evening with some members of the Mortenson development team as well. So what's before you this evening is a request for approval of the development agreement that we have negotiated with Mortenson Development. And again, this is for the Lake Street side of the State Street Campus Garage. And what this development agreement would do is it would outline our relationship moving forward with Mortenson Development over the next few years. And it would cover the time period between now and a real estate closing where we are designing and preparing for construction, as well as the time following a real estate closing when we would be engaged with construction. And so I should also mention that there is a typo in this memo. You'll see that 500 public parking spaces are noted. That is actually incorrect. The total number of parking spaces is 500, of which about 80 are private, leaving about 420 for public. So I apologize for that error in the memo. So just taking kind of step by step on what this development agreement would do for the city prior to closing, which we believe would occur in the month of January of 2024, the city and Mortenson Development would complete a series of steps that are noted within the memo. The first is we would each work on the design of our respective project components. So the city would work on the design for the public or for the parking structure, and Mortenson Development would work on the design for the private apartments above. And then we would each secure our land use approvals for those respective elements. We would work on negotiating a condominium relationship that would be ongoing once the project is completed, because we will own a condo unit within a much larger development. So in other words, there would be a condo unit for the parking component and a condo unit for the apartments. At a minimum, those would be 2 condo units. And so we would spend 2023 negotiating a condo agreement that would govern that relationship moving forward. We would finalize the purchase agreement and also the ground lease that we would utilize during construction with Mortenson Development. Next, we would bid the project for construction. The public portion of this project, which includes the parking and the intercity bus terminal, will be bidded as a public works project. So we would complete the design documents that I described below. We would then go out to bid, and we would know prior to closing on the real estate transaction what the cost of the project would be. And as I think everyone on this committee knows, this is a major issue in the current climate of rising construction costs. And this provides a bit of safety for the city in that we will know the cost at the time that we close on the transaction. We will execute and record a land use restriction regarding the affordable housing units, which are described further below. Mortenson Development would provide evidence to us that they have financing necessary to move forward with the private apartments, and we would do the same for the city funding. We would enter into a construction management and escrow agreement that are described a little further below. And then earlier in the year, so a January 31st, 2023 deadline, we would do 2 things. One, we would negotiate with Mortenson Development the definition of what we're calling the release milestone. And the release milestone is the date when we are finished with the major structural components of the parking structure, and we are able to turn over the site for Mortenson Development to begin construction of the apartments above. And we also would be hiring Mortenson Construction as a construction manager. And by the end of January of next year, we will finalize agreement on a fee amount. So everything that I just described would occur throughout 2023 and would occur before we have completed the real estate closing. So in other words, we will still fully own and control that property up until that real estate closing. Then, again, likely in January of 2024, we would actually have the real estate closing. And that's the point in time when Mortenson Development would buy the Lake Street side of the State Street Campus Garage property from the city. What would happen at the same time that Mortenson Development were to purchase that property from us is that we would in turn lease it back from them for $1 so that we would be able to complete construction of the parking components of the project. We would then proceed with demolishing the existing Lake Street side of the State Street Campus Garage, and we would do that at our cost. And then we would have about a year, so on or before January 1st of 2025, to reach the release milestone, which again is the date that we would have the structural elements of the parking structure completed such that Mortenson Development could come in and begin constructing the private apartments. And that date is really critical because Mortenson Development needs to hit the student lease-up period in the summer of 2026. So they really need to start on the apartment project by January 1st, 2025. Otherwise, there's a chance that they'll miss that lease-up period. Certain construction costs will be reimbursed by one another because we will be completing some of the structural work for some of the apartments that line the parking structure, and Mortenson will be paying us for that work. Mortenson Development would then move forward with construction of the private apartments above. And we, as the city, would be required to finish the parking component by May 1st, 2026, or that date be extended if the apartments are taking longer to construct. But May 1st, 2026 is the goal for completion of the city component. And then the apartments would follow soon thereafter, so that students can begin moving in later in the summer of 2026. Once the certificate of occupancy has been issued, Mortenson Development would sell the city its condos. So we would take over ownership of the parking component and the intercity bus component, and we would pay $1 to have ownership of that. And then at that point in time, moving forward, Mortenson Development would own the apartments above. The city would own the condo unit that has all of the parking. During those closing months of construction, we as the city at our cost would also reconstruct Hawthorne Court, which will likely be torn up throughout the construction period. And a new Hawthorne Court would include a much wider 7-foot pedestrian zone, as it would be only one-way northbound, unlike the two-way street that exists there today. So that is a summary of the process of what would happen in the months ahead throughout 2023, 24, and then moving into 25. A couple of other elements to highlight within the development agreement are, first, the escrow agreement. When Mortenson Development pays the city $18 million to buy the property from us, rather than that funding going immediately to the parking utility, it would go into an escrow account for then payment to the parking utility along what we've outlined here. So the parking utility would receive its first $500,000 after utility work is completed. They would then receive $4 million once we have finished the foundation, $7.5 million once we reach that release milestone. And then the balance of $6 million would be released in its entirety if we achieve the release milestone by January 1st, 2025, or with some potential financial damages if we do not meet that January 1, 2025 milestone. The development agreement also talks about the affordable housing component. There will be an affordable housing component. What we are proposing in the resolution is to go with option A, which would provide us with the full $18 million air right payment. Option A would provide 100 affordable beds. Approximately 68 beds would be discounted at 10%, with the remaining 32 beds discounted by 25%. There'll be a 30-year land use restriction that this affordability needs to be maintained. And Mortenson Development will be responsible for executing a memorandum of understanding with UW's Office of Financial Aid, which would be the office that would refer students to Mortenson Development to occupy these affordable units. We believe this project has numerous benefits to the city, one of them being financial. Given the air rights payment and the increment that we believe the private apartments will generate, we believe we can cover about 2/3 of the cost of construction of the parking structure using non-parking utility sources. And this development will certainly have a positive impact on downtown, adding additional housing, enlivening Lake Street, and having a new intercity bus terminal. All that being said, we did want to highlight that there are some risks at various stages of the project to the city that you as the Finance Committee should be made aware of. The first is up until the time when we close on the project, so up until January 1st of 2024, really both parties can walk away from the project. So if either the city or Mortenson Development discover that we just financially can't make this project happen, given rising interest rates, rising construction costs, we can walk away. So on the one hand, it is an opportunity that we have up until the closing to walk away. But there is a downside to that, which is we will likely invest a couple of $1 million in design work throughout 2023. And if either party walks away, that might be a sunk cost that we can't readily use moving forward. Once the project closing occurs, January 2024, at that point, Mortenson Development has paid us for the property. So the first set of sort of risk is on the part of the city, that if we're not able to perform and meet that January 1st, 2025 release milestone, there are penalties related to the escrow agreement that I described previously. If we are really egregious in not moving forward with construction of the parking ramp, Mortenson Development would have the option of completing construction and possibly even taking over ownership of the parking structure, although that is certainly on the extreme end of what would occur in that situation. Assuming that the public component of the project moves forward on budget and as planned, and we meet that release milestone date, there are still some risks for the city from the perspective of Mortenson Development completing construction of the apartment tower above. As we've talked about previously, the apartment tower is really a seamless extension of the parking structure below. And so if for whatever reason work on the tower were not to move forward, there is some risk the city would need to come in and finish that work so that we could get the parking structure open. And then as noted here in the concluding paragraph, there'll be about 2.5 years that the parking utility will be without that Lake Street side of the parking structure. Obviously, that has an impact on the revenue to the parking utility, and any additional delay in the project would further delay that revenue to the parking utility. So with that, I know that I'm joined this evening from, I believe, Kevin Ramakrishna in the city attorney's office. Tom Lynch is here as well, as our representatives of the Mortenson Development team. And we would be happy to take questions and forward them to whoever might be the best person to answer them.
Thank you, Matt. Before we go to questions, I think it might be appropriate to remind alders what would be appropriate in open session and what might be required a closed session. Kevin, do you want to help us with that?
I am sorry. That was directed at me.
Yeah, sorry. So would you like to remind? I figured I'd give you an easy one. Would you like to remind alders what we should be in, what's okay to discuss in open session and what's okay to do in closed?
Yeah. So actually, on this one, I think most of the conversation is appropriate for open session. If we get into anything that is about negotiating, then we would prefer that to be done in closed session, particularly as we discuss any potential legal risks that we may see some point in the future if we want to sort of go down a path that's, maybe a little bit beyond sort of a high level. That would be something that would be more appropriate for closed session. But if you're going down that path, I will jump in and make sure people know.
The chair gives you permission to interrupt anybody if they go down a path they should not be going down. Thank you. Alder Figueroa Cole, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just have a question for the chair. If I drop the call, do we still have quorum?
We do.
Okay, I'm sorry, guys. I kind of double book myself and I'm about to start another meeting. So I'm going to have to watch this one online. So
thank you.
I don't have any questions this time.
Thank you. Any questions? Alder Vitterer, go ahead.
Yeah, I just sort of a question about the affordable housing units. So that discount that was discussed, that's going to be off of market rate. Is that the plan?
Yes, that's correct.
And so I guess my question is a 10% discount off of market rate affordable? How do we define that?
I mean, I think that's a very good question. I mean, these units are, admittedly they're brand newly constructed units. They may, even with a discount, not be affordable to everyone that is in need of housing and housing at a discounted rate. There is some opportunity that within that sort of $18 million air rights payment, we outlined 100 units discounted at either 10% or 25%. You'll note in the development agreement that there is some opportunity that you could have slightly greater depth of affordability, but then have fewer affordable units and still achieve that $18 million value. This is an area where we likely do have some additional opportunity to make some adjustments moving forward, working with Mortenson Development. Once we lock into that $18 million purchase price, that limits the amount of flexibility that we have. But if there was a desire to have even deeper affordability, it would probably mean reducing the total number of units, but there might be some capacity to continue those conversations.
Yeah, I guess my recollection from our former conversation on this was that we did want that flexibility and to sort of have there be like almost like a pot of this is how much Mortenson can afford to not take in. And then it would depend on the students who apply and the need that they have. So you might have some students who need a 50% reduction rate, and then you would have fewer units. But it would still then get those students into housing that they otherwise wouldn't be able to get into.
Yeah, we have had kind of with that idea that was brought forth previously, we have had some additional conversations with the UW's Office of Financial Services, and we're not sure that realistically that we can get that fine-grained of a tailored package to an individual student. Unfortunately, that's just doesn't seem like that really fits within how the financial aid is structured to students. It's more of a sort of a package that is provided to the student, and then the student needs to take that and kind of figure out what they can make work within that package that they're provided. So unfortunately, I'm not sure that we are going to be able to do that. I think that we're going to have more sort of generic discount rates, and then students will have to see if they're able to make that work with the financial aid package that they receive.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Alder. Any other questions? Okay, Alder Veer, go ahead.
Thank you, President Furman. I actually thank you very much for the overview, Matt, of your memo. And obviously, thanks to the whole staff team for their work on this. It's been going on for quite some time. I just had one process question related to the affordability component. And that is, does the development agreement exhibit cover the LURA and the actual council approval thereof, which requires the MOU with the UW Office of Student Financial Aid, or will there then be subsequent resolution for this committee and the council to consider relating to the affordability component of the development agreement?
So one of the decisions that will be made is the purchase price. And so there are two options as far as which version or the amount of affordability that you're actually going to get. This development agreement does have a sample MOU, and it calls out for Allura. I was not anticipating coming back to put in any additional approvals for the land use restriction itself.
Okay, so thank you, Kevin. So what's before us would really be the final approvals on the affordability. And I think we're all very clear on the two options laid out that, one is one of the areas called out in the wording of the resolution. But adoption of this resolution and the development agreement would not require future approvals. I guess what I'm getting at, Kevin, is and I realize this is a totally different example because, it wasn't the city's air rights with the core spaces development on State Street that you and this largely the same team worked on with core for the affordability component of their Olive Madison project, as they call it. But as you obviously remember, we had the MOU that was available to us between the parties, and then the council adopted that resolution for the LoRa. So my question was, again, process wise, is all that being covered in tonight's action and the council's action next Tuesday?
So what we've, in my estimation is yes, that it is all being covered because we've sort of included the concept in this development agreement. I think that we know that the MOU is going to look what we have in the previous deal. Having said that, it is up to you if you want to tell us otherwise. I don't think there's anything in here that would prevent the council from saying, hey, we want to get a look at what the MOU says. It'll be attached to the land use restriction. I don't know to what extent we would actually have any say in what that MOU is doing. Mostly those are more like information sharing. So it's up to you though. If you want that, I don't see anything in here that would say, oh, it's, that's not something that can be done.
Thank you. Matt, thank you, Kevin. Matt, were you saying that you had specific conversations with the UW Office of Student Financial Aid, or would that be Matt Wachter, who I know is on vacation still today?
I was in one meeting with that office. I know Matt Wachter's had even more conversations above and beyond that.
Mm-hmm. I do, and I don't want to not overstep, but sort of go off on a tangent here. I just in case this is sort of where you're going with it, there have been a few people who have talked about, having something akin to like a 5-year look back and sort of understanding what the needs have actually been and whether the affordability needs to be changed in some respect to better meet the actual conditions that exist with the students. Mortenson is open to that. That is something that we're planning on seeing in the MOU with the UW. We think that's where it's most appropriate. So to say that this is the final chance to review the affordability, I'm not sure that's actually the case. I think we'll push to continue to have those look backs because that seems to be something people want.
Yes, and thank you, Kevin. Again, that is again with my recent experience with our first attempt at this. Obviously, a bit different since it wasn't a city that owned the property. That was something that I knew that we had worked on and had been successfully included. I guess my thought is, President Furman, is it appropriate to ask the registrant a question on this topic, Nate Gundrum from Mortenson Development, at this junction?
There's no objection from the committee. That's fine.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here, Nate. Welcome. Could you just add your thoughts on how much process conversations you've had with UW Office of Student Financial Aid and how soon there might be a MOU that policymakers might have access to?
We're ready to engage Alder Revere. coming out of this round of approvals, we just wanted to make sure the basic foundation was signed off on by the various stakeholders that are involved in this project. Those discussions to date, in full disclosure, have been had by Matt Walker and Matt Mikolajewski. We have not been on the private development side a party to those conversations with the Office of Financial Aid to date.
I see. You all collectively thought that it was best if the council approved the development agreement.
That's right.
Outlines and you were clearly selected, and then you would work with that office.
That's right.
Yeah. But obviously there's nothing in regards to the affordability component that differs from what is in the memo or what the conversation we've had this evening, correct?
Correct. Yep. We've been working together with the city to evaluate, a number of different options over the last 12 months that, it's a balancing act between number of affordable beds, depth of affordability, and, the purchase price to offset the parking utilities cost for the new parking garage. So we narrowed that down to the two options that you see in Exhibit F. But certainly if there's some additional flexibility that can be built in, working together with the UW that allows those depths of affordability to be changed over time based on actual need, we're certainly willing to build that into the MOU when we get to that point.
Thank you for articulating that. I think that's a comforting language. And it, obviously, as we all know, the issue of affordability was fully discussed previously at closed session in this forum. So we don't have to go there tonight. My interest was just making sure that policymakers are able to see that language into the future and allow for potential flexibility. And it sounds like this is, I guess, back to staff questions. So thank you, Nate. But from your perspectives, Kevin and Matt, there's nothing in this resolution that would prohibit policymakers from requesting that the MOU be considered by the future council, for example, and give our seal of approval to it. That was a question for Matt.
I mean, there's nothing that would prevent it. There's also nothing that specifically calls out that we would be approving it. So I don't know if that's something you want to add.
Yeah, why don't I don't want to take the time to noodle in a potential amendment tonight. I know the alder of the district, Alder Person Heck, is in the meeting, and perhaps we'll work together on a simple amendment to just memorialize that fact, even though it's clear that we perhaps could do that. Oh, thank you, Alder Heck, for joining us with your camera on now. So again, my thought was I didn't want to take the time now, but I thought it would provide comfort to policymakers moving forward on this critical issue if we actually saw the specific language, as was the case with the core proposal. So those are my thoughts. I don't know if anyone wants, if Alder Heck wishes to add anything, but at this point, thank you, President Furman. I'll yield. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder Revere. Any more questions for staff? Okay, I don't believe we had a motion. So Alder Revere, would you like to make a motion?
I'm pleased to move adoption of the resolution.
Can I get a second? Great, thank you, Alder. Any discussion? Not seeing any, I'm going to assume approval by unanimous consent, and I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
See no objection. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.